California's Pacific Coast Highway is one of America's most spectacular roads. Opened at a length of 655 miles back in 1934, this roadway was and is an engineering marvel as it runs along unforgiving cliffs that are known to fall into the sea. And when they do, massive segments of the road go down with them. This is the story of California's greatest roadway and why it's falling into the sea. I'm your host, Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. California State Route 1, also known as Highway 1 or the Pacific Coast Highway, was constructed for various reasons. Still, primarily, it was meant to improve transportation and access along the California coastline. But putting practicality aside, one of the other noted motivations for building Highway 1 was to create a scenic coastal route to showcase the California coastline's natural beauty. This part of the scheme made sense, as the highway offers breathtaking views of the Pacific Ocean, cliffs, beaches, and other picturesque landscapes. It has become a popular tourist attraction and a symbol of California's beauty. Considering the Pacific Coast Highway's prevalence in popular media, I'd say the effect was a massive success. That being said, from its conception, building this road was very complex, with some people believing that it would be impossible. Let's start with the geological challenges, as the coastline of California is known for its geological diversity, with steep cliffs, rocky terrain, and areas prone to landslides. In other words, the reality of today's erosion was expected. Additionally, many bridges and tunnels were constructed in the highly unstable geological conditions to maintain the highway's scenic beauty and navigate challenging coastal features. Considering that reality, the roadway was insanely expensive. Other challenges also stood in the way, like activists who didn't fancy perverting California's most beautiful features, its coastline with a 655-mile roadway. Safety was also a concern, as the coastal highway could be prone to brutal winds, torrential rains, and forces of the ocean, all of which might render an automobile defenseless. The state was well aware of this reality, as there had already been trials to build along the coastline as early as 1911. State construction of what became SR1 started after the state's third highway bond issue passed before 1910. In fact, although SR1's designation was first assigned in 1939, various portions had been posted and referred to by different names and numbers over the years. Most accounts suggest that the endeavor started with the need for a direct coastal route between Ventura and Santa Barbara. The idea was so local that funds to begin building the Rincon Sea Level Road in 1911 were raised thanks to private contributions. The route between the Ventura River and Carpinteria had been unpaved and ran along small beaches that skirted coastal bluff rocks outcropping at low tide. Around the same time, construction of the Southern Pacific Coastline Railroad had created a road flanked by riprap along this area. But to make this part of the first coastal route for motorists driving from San Francisco to Los Angeles, they paved the road and built wooden causeways where the route flooded from the ocean waves. Just when the concept of this coastal road was gaining momentum, local funding ran out, and the newly formed State Highway Commission took over and completed the road in 1913. And the timing for government funding couldn't have come at a better moment, as the implementation of tunnels and bridges meant that the expenses were about to go through the roof. One of the most challenging routes along the Pacific Coast Highway ran along the Big Sur coast. The state first approved building what was then known as Route 56, or the Carmel-San Simeon Highway, to connect Big Sur to the rest of California in 1919. Federal funds were approved in 1921, with voters approving additional state funds to make that stretch possible. In addition, labor prices were put in check when San Quentin State Prison set up 3 temporary prison camps to provide unskilled convict labor to help with the road construction. One was set up by Little Sur River, one at Kirk Creek, and a third was later established in the south at Anderson Creek. Inmates were paid 35 cents per day and had their prison sentence reduced in return, meaning there was some incentive to get the job done properly. The route necessitated the construction of 33 bridges, the largest of which was the Bixby Bridge. 6 more concrete arch bridges were built between Point Sur and Carmel. The state stayed at it for an arduous 18 years of construction, plagued by funding issues that almost killed the project during the Great Depression. However, New Deal funds saved the day, and America's most beautiful highway opened on June the 17th, 1937. The road was initially called the Carmel-San Simeon Highway and designated as Route 56, but it was better known as the Roosevelt Highway, honoring the President of the United States and the architect of the New Deal. Extensions continued over the years, and by the 1940s, California State 1 was completed, but it wouldn't take long for the landslides to begin. Well, it's difficult to pinpoint an exact date when landslides first began along the Pacific Coast Highway. They have been a reoccurring issue since its early days of construction and continue to be a concern that requires regular monitoring and mitigation efforts. The segment along Pacifica and the Daly City coast in what is now known as Thornton Beach was damaged and rendered unstable after a 5.3 magnitude earthquake on March the 22nd, 1957. SR1 was then eventually rerouted to turn inland and join Interstate 280. Big Rock Mesa landslide in September of 1983 in Malibu was one of the worst in state history. A total of 250 homes collapsed, cracked, or slid off their foundations, with 30 homes being condemned. The state agreed to pay $40 million, as cutting through the hillside to build the Pacific Coast Highway was a contributing cause to the disaster. The Devil's Slide area has been prone to major landslides. One slide in 1995 caused the road to be closed for 5 months, while another in 2006 led to a 4-month closure. The Tom Lanton tunnels, named after the former U.S. Congressman Tom Lanton's, opened in 2013 to bypass the area. In 2011, major reconstruction was completed between Muir Beach and Stinson Beach, including adding a 523-foot long, 20-foot high, but mostly buried retaining wall. This followed a 4-month, $25 million reconstruction that repaired damages from a 2007 landslide. And yet, the issues would continue to expand. A March 2011 landslide in the Big Sur region forced Caltrans to close the highway for several months. A section south of Lucia, prone to frequent landslides, known as Pitkin's Curve and Rain Rocks, was replaced with a bridge and covered with a rock shed. Another major slide at Mud Creek closed a 30-mile stretch of the highway in May of 2007. The huge slide at Mud Creek covered about 1/3 of a mile of road with 40 feet of dirt and rocks. The slide was on a section of road that was already closed due to smaller slides. Multiple landslides during successive storm systems in January of 2023 forced the closure of nearly 40 miles of highway. As of April 2023, over 25 miles of the highway still remain closed. And the list goes on, but given the constant nature of these disasters, there were also cases where the state needed to abandon sections of the road altogether. As a result, some of that asphalt is now resting under the sea. For example, the Chotoni Coast Area segment in Santa Cruz County experienced a significant landslide in 2017, which led to a portion of the highway collapsing into the sea. The road was abandoned in that area and efforts were made to reroute the traffic. Another section of the highway running through the Julia Pfeiffer Burns State Park in Big Sur collapsed into the sea, and it's perhaps one of the most famous examples of this type of erosion, since the McWay Falls overlook offers a unique view of this abandoned section, which is perhaps an almost apocalyptic contrast with California's immense beauty. In Ragged Point, the highway was closed and abandoned temporarily, with traffic rerouted to address the unstable terrain. Finally, the Mirror Beach Overlook in Marin County is a section of the Pacific Coast Highway that suffered erosion and landslides as well. The road was abandoned and a new alignment was constructed to bypass the unstable area. Now, if we put the sensation of landslides aside for a moment, it's also interesting to consider another challenge that Highway 1 has: overcrowding from tourists. Tourism was a significant factor from the early days of the Pacific Coast Highway. However, these days, popular sections of the PCH, particularly those near major cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco, can experience heavy traffic during weekends, holidays, and the summer season, leading to congestion and extreme frustration for both locals and tourists. And remember those famous lookout points I mentioned earlier? Well, good luck finding a parking spot at one. Finding parking along the scenic highway can be practically impossible, especially at popular viewpoints and attractions. And even if you do find a spot, the overcrowding is ridiculous. Iconic spots such as McWay Falls in Big Sur or Bixby Creek Bridge are filled with masses of tourists taking selfies, making it difficult to enjoy the otherwise serene natural beauty. Obviously, this also has an adverse effect on the environment, including damage to fragile ecosystems from excessive littering, noise, and disturbance. Apparently, these disturbances drive these small coastal communities mad, affecting the quality of life for local residents. Perhaps the darkest side of tourist traffic is that the higher volume of cars creates a higher risk of accidents. From 2015 to 2018, there were 633 injuries and 17 fatal accidents. Looking at Berkeley's transportation injury map from the same period, the density of incidences along the highway becomes clear. California authorities emphasize that many of these accidents are caused by recklessness and that speed is not always at fault. One article from The Graphic pretty much sums up the notion adequately. Reading, quote, "Under California Vehicle Code 23103, reckless driving is defined as driving a vehicle in willful or wanton disregard for the safety of persons or property." Chris Frost, chair of the Malibu Safety Commission, said that reckless driving is an umbrella term, elaborating that, quote, "Reckless isn't usually what's written, it's speed," Frost said. He goes on to say that it's a tough one to track because it's usually a preemptive ticket if it's something else that will drive that ticket besides recklessness. It does not show up. In other words, citing a specific crime is easier to defend in court than offering an umbrella term like recklessness. Anyhow, California Highway Patrol Officer Wes Haver said the crime of reckless driving is highly dependent on the circumstance of each individual case, stating, quote, "If they're arrested, not just cited, it would be a misdemeanor." Haver said, quote, "If they killed someone, it might be bumped up to involuntary manslaughter, which means they didn't mean to do it, but they knew that there were risks associated with the reckless driving." Things like drifting and tire screeching help build up cases for the officer to prove in court that the reckless driving charge is justified. During the weekends, the mountain roads in Calabasas and Agora Hills are known spots for reckless driving incidents. Hever said he gets multiple complaints from residents about dangerous drivers, quoting that Mulholland Highway attracts people from all over the world. He elaborated saying, whether they're from overseas or just Orange County, just here for a day ride, we pretty much get it all due to the beautiful scenery. Now, bringing us full circle, I'd like to challenge you with a complex, maybe even controversial question. As on one hand, we acknowledge that the Pacific Coast Highway is perhaps one of the most beautiful roadways on Earth. On the other, we have to acknowledge the obvious issue with the degradation caused by tourists, but also the fact that Mother Nature is literally pushing this road back into the sea. Would it not be more noble of us to just allow the land of California to reclaim its original form along the coast? Do we really need to drive our cars there? I'd love to hear your opinions on that in the comment section below. And thank you all so much for watching. Until next time, I'm Ryan Socash, signing off.